Young women standing at the edge of a forbidden river, one begging for her life, while the other's eyes burn with jealousy so intense it's about to destroy everything they've ever known. In just a few seconds, one push will change both their lives forever and reveal a truth about human nature that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, family, and the price we pay for letting envy consume our hearts. This isn't just another story. This is about what happens when jealousy becomes so powerful that it transforms someone you trust into your worst nightmare. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll never look at sibling rivalry the same way again. Let me take you to a small village where everyone knew everyone, where secrets were impossible to keep, and where two young women were about to discover that sometimes the people closest to us are capable of the most unthinkable acts. Ugama had always been the light of her family. From the moment she could walk, she moved through their small Nigerian village like sunshine breaking through morning clouds. Her laugh was infectious. Her smile could melt the hardest hearts, and everywhere she went, people couldn't help but be drawn to her warmth. She wasn't trying to be perfect, that was just who she was. When the elderly needed help carrying water from the well, Ugama was there before anyone even asked. When children cried, she'd appear with a story or a song that would have them giggling within minutes. She had this natural gift of making everyone around her feel seen, valued, and loved. Her parents, Mama Nkem and Papa Chike, would watch their daughter with pride that radiated from every pore. At village gatherings, other parents would constantly praise Ugama's kindness, her intelligence, her beauty. "That girl of yours," they'd say, shaking their heads in amazement, "she's truly blessed. You must have done something very right to deserve such a daughter." And Mama Nkem and Papa Chike would beam, their chests swelling with the kind of pride that parents dream of feeling. They'd nod graciously, but inside they were bursting with joy. Their Ugama was indeed special. She was their miracle, their gift, their reason for gratitude every single day. But in every story of light, there's always a shadow lurking nearby. And Ugama's shadow had a name: Ada. Ada was Ugama's older sister, but you'd never guess it from the way people treated them. While Ugama glowed, Ada seemed to fade into the background like an afterthought. She wasn't ugly, not in any means, but standing next to Ugama was like standing next to the sun. Everything about Ada seemed dimmer in comparison. Where Ugama was naturally graceful, Ada had to work at every gesture. Where Ugama's kindness flowed effortlessly, Ada's attempts at helpfulness often went unnoticed, or worse, were met with polite but unenthusiastic thanks. It wasn't that Ada was mean or selfish. She just didn't have that magnetic quality that drew people in like her younger sister did. And Ada noticed. Oh, how she noticed.
She noticed how conversations would shift when Ugoma entered a room. She watched how their parents' faces would light up when Ugoma spoke, while her own words seemed to barely register. She felt the way people's attention would drift to Ugoma, even when Ada was in the middle of telling a story. At first, Ada tried to be understanding. She told herself that she loved her sister, that she should be happy for Ugoma's success and popularity. But love and jealousy can exist in the same heart, and slowly, gradually, like poison seeping through water, the jealousy began to grow stronger than the love. It started with small moments of resentment. When Ugoma received compliments, Ada would force a smile while her stomach twisted with envy. When their parents praised Ugoma's achievements, Ada would feel invisible, like she was disappearing right there in the same room. The breaking point came during the Festival of New Yam, the village's most important celebration of the year. The Festival of New Yam was when the entire village came together to celebrate the harvest, to give thanks for their blessings, and to showcase the talents of their young people. For weeks leading up to the festival, young women would prepare traditional dances, songs, and performances to present to the community. Ada had been practicing for months. She'd worked on a traditional dance that told the story of the river goddess, spending hours perfecting every movement, every gesture. She'd sewn her own costume, choosing colors that she thought would make her shine under the festival lights. This was going to be her moment. Finally, she'd be the one receiving applause, admiration, recognition. But then Ugoma decided to participate too. Ugoma hadn't planned to perform. She'd been content to help with decorations and food preparation. But a few days before the festival, some of the village elders approached her, practically begging her to sing. They'd heard her voice during church services and village gatherings, and they insisted that the festival wouldn't be complete without Ugoma's gift. Please, they said, just one song. Your voice is like honey, child. It would be a blessing to our celebration. Ugoma was hesitant. She could see something flickering in Ada's eyes, something that made her stomach feel uneasy. But the elders were so insistent, and she didn't want to seem ungrateful or prideful by refusing. Maybe just one song, she agreed softly, glancing at Ada apologetically. Ada's smile was tight, forced. Of course, sister, that sounds wonderful. But inside, Ada felt something crack. This was supposed to be her moment, her chance to finally shine. And now, once again, Ugoma was going to steal the spotlight without even trying. The night of the festival, Ada performed her dance beautifully. The crowd applauded warmly, and for a few precious minutes, she felt the glow of appreciation she'd been craving. Her parents smiled proudly, and Ada's heart soared. This was it. This was her time. And then Ugoma stepped forward to sing. What happened next was something Ada would replay in her mind 1,000 times, each memory making the jealousy burn brighter. Ugoma opened her mouth and released a voice so pure, so achingly beautiful that the entire village fell silent. It wasn't just singing, it was something transcendent, something that seemed to touch every soul present. When the song ended, the silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then the applause erupted, thunderous and sustained. People were wiping tears from their eyes. The elders were nodding in amazement. Children were staring at Ugoma like she was magic. And Ada's beautiful dance, her months of preparation, her moment of glory, it all became a footnote to Ugoma's performance. "Did you hear that voice?" people whispered as they left the festival. "That Ugoma, she's truly blessed by the ancestors. Such a gift, her parents must be so proud. I've never heard anything so beautiful in my life." Ada walked home in silence, her heart heavy with a bitterness that tasted like metal in her mouth. That night, lying in her bed, she made a decision that would haunt her forever. She couldn't keep living in Ugoma's shadow. Something had to change. And if Ugoma wouldn't step aside willingly, then Ada would have to make her. Over the following weeks, Ada's jealousy transformed from a quiet resentment into something much darker and more dangerous. She began to watch Ugoma with the intensity of a predator, studying prey, cataloging every moment of praise, every smile their parents gave her, every instance where Ugoma's natural charm made Ada feel invisible. The worst part wasn't even Ugoma's success. It was how effortless it all seemed for her. Ugoma never had to try to be liked. She never had to rehearse conversations or practice expressions in the mirror. She never had to work for their parents' attention or affection. Everything that Ada desperately wanted came to Ugoma as naturally as breathing. She started to convince herself that it wasn't fair. Why should Ugoma get everything when Ada works so much harder? Why should she have to live in the shadow of someone who didn't even seem to appreciate what she had? These thoughts circled in Ada's mind like vultures, growing stronger and more vicious with each passing day. She began to fantasize about scenarios where Ugoma would be gone. Not dead, she told herself, just away. Maybe married and moved to another village. Maybe fallen from grace somehow. Maybe just absent long enough for people to remember that Ada existed too. But fantasies weren't enough anymore. The jealousy had grown too large, too consuming. It was eating her alive from the inside, and she needed relief. She needed action. The idea came to her gradually, like a whisper from the darkest corner of her heart. The Forbidden River. Everyone in the village knew about it. The fast-moving current that had claimed lives before, the dangerous depths that even the strongest swimmers avoided. It was off limits for a reason. But it was also isolated, private, the perfect place for an accident to happen.
Ada began to plan with the methodical precision of someone who had thought about this for far too long. She studied Ugoma's routines, her habits, her favorite walking paths. She noted when Ugoma liked to take solitary walks to think or pray, when she was most likely to be alone and unguarded. The plan was simple, terrible in its simplicity. Ada would ask Ugoma to accompany her on a walk to collect herbs near the Forbidden River. She'd tell her about a special plant their grandmother used to gather there, something that would make their mother's favorite tea. Ugoma, with her helpful nature, would agree without suspicion. Once they were there at the edge of the rushing water, Ada would, she didn't let herself think too clearly about that part. She just knew that Ugoma would fall in and the current would take care of the rest. It would look like a tragic accident. People would mourn, of course, but then they would turn to Ada for comfort. Finally, she would be the daughter who mattered. The truly horrifying thing about Ada's plan wasn't its cruelty. It was how reasonable it seemed to her jealousy-poisoned mind. She had convinced herself that this was justice, that she deserved to be the favored daughter, that Ugoma's existence was somehow stealing something that rightfully belonged to her. Jealousy is like that. It doesn't just make you hate the object of your envy, it makes you hate yourself. And then it convinces you that eliminating the source of comparison will cure that self-hatred. It's a lie, of course, but it's a lie that feels like truth when you're drowning in bitterness. 3 weeks after the festival, Ada put her plan into motion. Ugoma, Ada called softly on a Thursday morning as her sister helped their mother prepare breakfast. Would you like to take a walk with me later? I want to show you something special. Ugoma looked up with genuine pleasure. She'd been worried about Ada lately. Her sister had seemed distant, almost cold since the festival. A walk together sounded like exactly what they needed to reconnect. Of course, sister. I'd love that. Where did you want to go? Near the old river path. I remember Grandmama used to take us there to gather bitter leaf. I thought we could collect some for Mama's tea. Ugoma hesitated for just a moment. The old river path led close to the forbidden waters, and she'd always been cautious about that area. But Ada was smiling at her with more warmth than she'd shown in weeks, and Ugoma didn't want to seem fearful or ungrateful. That sounds wonderful. Let me finish helping Mama, and then we can go. As they prepared to leave that afternoon, their mother watched them with satisfaction. It's good to see you two spending time together again, she said, adjusting Ugoma's head wrap with tender hands. Sisters should be close. You're each other's greatest blessing. Ada's smile was tight as she nodded, but inside, something twisted painfully. Greatest blessing. If only Mama knew what her blessed daughter was about to lose. The walk started pleasantly enough. The sisters chatted about village gossip, upcoming celebrations, and shared memories from their childhood. For a few precious minutes, Ada almost forgot about her plan. This was nice, just being with Ugoma, talking and laughing like they used to when they were children. But then they passed Mrs. Okafor's house, and the elderly woman came out to greet them. Ugoma, my dear, she called, barely glancing at Ada.
I've been telling everyone about your beautiful song at the festival. You have the voice of an angel. Your parents must be so proud." Ugoma blushed modestly, but Ada felt the familiar fire of jealousy reignite in her chest. Even now, even on what was supposed to be their special walk together, Ugoma was stealing the attention. "Thank you, Ma," Ugoma replied politely. Ada performed beautifully too. Her dance was stunning. Mrs. Okafor nodded absently, her focus still entirely on Ugoma. Yes, I'm sure, but that voice of yours, child, it's truly a gift from God." As they walked away, Ada's jaw was clenched so tightly it ached. The brief moment of sisterly affection was gone, replaced by the cold determination that had been growing inside her for weeks.
They were getting close to the river now. Ada could hear the rushing water through the trees. The Forbidden River was exactly as dangerous as its reputation suggested. The water moved fast and dark, swollen from recent rains, with a current that could sweep away even experienced swimmers. Standing at its edge, both sisters felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Are you sure Grandmama used to come here?" Ugama asked, her voice uncertain. "It seems so dangerous." "She was very careful," Ada replied, her own voice strangely flat. She knew exactly where it was safe to gather plants. They walked along the bank, ostensibly looking for the bitter leaf Ada had mentioned. But Ada's attention wasn't on plants. It was on the water, on the current, on the perfect spot where a person might slip and fall with no chance of rescue. Ugama was bending down to examine a cluster of leaves when Ada positioned herself behind her sister, close to the water's edge. This was it. This was the moment she'd been planning for weeks. All she had to do was push. Ada raised her hands, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it over the sound of the rushing water. Ugama was right there, vulnerable, trusting, completely unaware of what was about to happen. But something made Ugama turn around at that exact moment. Some instinct, some warning whisper from the universe. She saw Ada's hands raised, saw the strange expression on her sister's face, saw the way Ada was positioned to strike. "Ada," Ugama's voice was small, confused, frightened. "What are you doing?" For a split second, Ada froze. Looking into Ugama's eyes, those trusting, loving eyes that had never seen Ada as anything but a beloved sister, she almost came to her senses, almost remembered who she used to be before jealousy consumed her. But then Ugama took a step backward, away from Ada, and that small movement felt like rejection. Like even now, even in this moment, Ugama was pulling away from her, choosing to be separate, choosing to be better. "You don't understand," Ada said, her voice breaking. "You don't understand what it's like to be invisible, to watch everyone love you while I just disappear." Ugama's eyes widened with horror as she realized what was happening. "Ada, no, please. We can talk about this. I love you. You're my sister. Stop saying that." Ada's voice was sharp, desperate. "Stop being so perfect. Stop making me feel like nothing. I'm not trying to." "You don't have to try. That's the problem. Everything comes so easily to you. Everyone loves you without you even having to work for it. Do you know what that feels like for me? Do you know what it's like to live in your shadow every single day?" Ugama was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she pressed herself against a tree, trying to get away from her sister's reaching hands. "Please, Ada, please don't do this. I never wanted to hurt you. I never knew you felt this way." "It's too late for sorry," Ada replied. And there was something dead in her voice now, something that had given up on everything except this one terrible moment.
What happened next took only seconds, but those seconds would replay in both their minds for the rest of their lives. Ada lunged forward, her hand striking Ugoma's shoulders with all the force of weeks of pent-up rage and jealousy. Ugoma's feet slipped on the muddy bank, her hands grasping desperately for something, anything, to stop her fall. "Ada, please," she screamed as she tumbled toward the dark water. "Help me." But Ada stood frozen, watching as her sister disappeared into the rushing current with a splash that seemed impossibly small for something so final. For a moment, the world was silent except for the sound of moving water. Then Ugoma's head appeared downstream, her arms flailing as she fought against the current that was carrying her away. "I can't swim," she screamed, her voice already fading with distance. "Ada, help me, please!" Ada could have run along the bank, could have thrown a branch or called for help, could have done a dozen things that might have saved her sister's life. Instead, she stood there and watched until Ugoma's cries faded into silence and the river carried her sister away from sight. Ada walked home slowly, trying to process what she had just done. She had imagined this moment so many times, but the reality was nothing like her fantasies. She didn't feel relieved or triumphant. She didn't feel like the weight of comparison had been lifted from her shoulders. She felt empty, hollow, like she had just torn out a piece of her own soul and thrown it into the river along with her sister. When she arrived home, her parents were sitting outside, enjoying the evening air. "Where's Ugoma?" her mother asked, looking behind Ada expectantly. Ada had prepared for this question, but suddenly the lie felt impossible to speak. She decided to visit Aunt Adana in the next village. She'll be staying there for a while." Her father frowned. Without saying goodbye, that's not like Ugoma. "She didn't want to worry you," Ada said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "She said she'll send word soon." Her parents exchanged a look of concern, but they accepted Ada's explanation. After all, Ada had never given them reason to doubt her before. That night, Ada lay in the bed she had shared with Ugoma since childhood, staring at the empty space where her sister should have been. She had thought that with Ugoma gone, she would finally be able to breathe freely, to exist without comparison, to be the only daughter her parents focused on. Instead, she felt like she was suffocating. When Ugoma didn't return after 3 days, her parents grew worried. When a week passed without word, they became frantic. Ada's story about Aunt Adana began to fall apart when a neighbor mentioned seeing Aunt Adana in the market, alone, with no mention of Ugoma visiting. The village organized search parties. They combed the paths Ugoma was known to walk, questioned everyone who might have seen her, sent messages to neighboring villages asking if anyone had encountered a young woman matching her description. Ada joined the searches, of course. She had to. Standing among the worried villagers, listening to their fears for Ugoma's safety, watching her parents' growing desperation was a special kind of torture. But what choice did she have? Where could she have gone? People whispered. It's not like Ugoma to just disappear. Something must have happened to her. She would never leave without telling her parents. Do you think she might have been taken? There have been stories of slavers in the region. Each speculation felt like a knife twisting in Ada's chest. She wanted to scream the truth, to confess what she had done, but terror kept her silent. What would happen to her if people knew? What would her parents do? What would the village elders decide? More than that, though, she was beginning to realize that the truth wouldn't bring Ugoma back. The damage was done, her sister was gone, and no amount of confession would change that. With Ugoma missing, Ada finally got what she thought she had always wanted. Her parents' attention focused entirely on her. Villagers who had barely noticed her before now spoke to her with sympathy and concern. Poor Ada, they said. She must be so worried about her sister. The two of them were so close. At least her parents still have one daughter to comfort them. Ada has been so strong through all this. What a good girl. But the attention felt wrong. It wasn't admiration or genuine appreciation. It was pity. They weren't seeing Ada for who she was. They were seeing her as Ugoma's grieving sister, as a replacement for the daughter who was truly missed. And her parents were shells of their former selves. Mama Nemkin barely ate, spending her days staring out the window as if Ugoma might appear at any moment. Papa Cheek aged years in the span of weeks, his shoulders bowed under the weight of fear and loss.
They tried to show Ada affection, tried to be grateful for the daughter they still had, but Ada could see the truth in their eyes. She was a consolation prize, a reminder of what they had lost, not a joy in her own right.
The worst part was that Ada was beginning to understand something terrible. She hadn't just killed Ugoma. She had killed the family she had been so desperate to belong to. The love she had been fighting for was gone forever, poisoned by grief and loss. As weeks turned into months, Ada's behavior began to draw attention. She was different, jumpy, defensive, prone to strange moods and unexplained silences. When people asked about the day Ugoma disappeared, her story changed in small but noticeable ways. First, she said Ugoma had told her she was visiting Aunt Adana. Then it was that Ugoma had mentioned wanting to travel. Later, she claimed her sister had been unhappy and talking about leaving. The village elders noticed these inconsistencies. They began to ask more pointed questions, to press Ada for details that she couldn't provide. "You were the last person to see Ugoma," Elder Okoro said during one particularly uncomfortable conversation. "Are you certain you've told us everything about that day?" Ada's heart raced, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. "I've told you everything I remember. I'm worried about her too. She's my sister." But doubt had been planted. People began to look at Ada differently, to whisper when she passed by. Some of the older women, who had lived long enough to recognize the signs of guilt and deception, started to share their suspicions with each other. "That girl knows more than she's saying. There's something in her eyes, something that wasn't there before. Sisters don't just vanish. Someone knows what happened to Ugoma." The pressure was building, and Ada could feel it closing in around her like a trap. She began to avoid public gatherings, to stay home whenever possible, to snap at anyone who asked too many questions about her missing sister. 6 months after that terrible day at the river, something impossible happened. Ugoma came home. She appeared at the village boundary on a market day, supported by travelers who had found her collapsed on a road 20 miles away. She was thinner than she had been, marked by hardship and exposure, but she was alive. The village erupted in celebration. People ran through the streets shouting the news. "Ugoma has returned! She's alive! She's home!" Ada heard the commotion from inside her family's house, where she had been hiding from yet another day of suspicious looks and whispered questions. At first, she thought she was hearing things. It wasn't possible. Ugoma was dead. She had watched her sister disappear into that river with her own eyes. But then she heard her mother scream of joy, her father's shouts of gratitude to the ancestors, and she knew that somehow, impossibly, her worst nightmare had come true. Ugoma was alive. The story Ugoma told was one of survival against impossible odds. She had been swept downstream by the current, battered against rocks, pulled under and pushed back up until her lungs burned and her strength nearly gave out. But somehow she had managed to grab hold of a fallen tree that had lodged against a bend in the river. She had pulled herself out of the water miles from where she had fallen in, injured and disoriented, with no idea which direction led home. For days, she had wandered through unfamiliar forest, surviving on wild fruits and stream water, following what she hoped were paths back toward civilization. When she finally encountered other people, she was delirious with fever from infected cuts and exposure. She had been taken to a distant village where a kind family nursed her back to health, but it had taken weeks for her to recover her own name, let alone where she had come from. "I kept having dreams about home," she told the gathered villagers, her voice weak but clear. "Dreams about Mama and Papa, about Ada. That's what kept me going, the need to get back to my family." But as Ugoma's physical strength returned and her memory cleared, she began to remember more details about the day she had nearly died. She remembered the walk to the river. She remembered Ada's strange behavior. She remembered, with crystal clarity, the moment her sister had pushed her into the rushing water. At first, she tried to convince herself it had been an accident. that Ada had been trying to help her and had accidentally caused her to fall. But the memory was too clear, too vivid. She remembered Ada's hands striking her shoulders with deliberate force. She remembered her sister standing on the bank, watching as she was swept away. Ugoma's first night home was a celebration that lasted until dawn. The entire village came to welcome her back, to hear her story, to give thanks for her miraculous survival.
Ada participated in the festivities, forcing smiles and expressions of relief, but inside, she was dying. It was over. Everything was over. Ugoma would remember what had happened. She would tell their parents, the village elders, everyone. Ada's crime would be exposed, and she would face whatever justice the community decided she deserved. But strangely, as the hours passed, Ugoma said nothing about the truth of that day. She spoke about getting lost, about her struggle to survive, about her gratitude to be home. She never mentioned Ada's role in her disappearance. When the celebrations finally wound down and the sisters were alone for the first time since that day at the river, Ada waited for the accusation she knew was coming. Instead, Ugoma looked at her with eyes full of sadness and said, "I remember everything, Ada." Ada's breath caught in her throat. "Ugoma, I remember what you did, and I remember why you did it." The words hung between them like a blade. Ada had spent months preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, she found she had no words, no excuses, no explanations that could possibly justify what she had done. "Are you going to tell them?" she whispered. Ugoma was quiet for a long moment, studying her sister's face. Ada looked terrible, thin, hollow-eyed, aged beyond her years by months of guilt and fear. "Look at yourself, Ada," Ugoma said softly. "Look at what jealousy has done to you. Do you think you need any punishment beyond what you've already done to yourself?" Ada looked down at her hands, at the fingers that had pushed her sister toward death. She had lost weight, lost sleep, lost any sense of peace or happiness. The victory she had thought she wanted had turned to ash in her mouth. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and the words were so inadequate they felt meaningless. "I'm so sorry, Ugoma. I don't know what came over me. I don't know how I could have." "You were in pain," Ugoma interrupted. "You were hurting, and you thought that hurting me would make it stop. But it didn't, did it?" Ada shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "It made everything worse. I thought if you were gone, I would finally be enough. But I just felt empty. I felt like I had destroyed everything good in my life." "You almost did," Ugoma said, and there was steel in her voice now. "You almost destroyed our family. You almost destroyed yourself. And you did destroy the sister I used to know." The truth of those words hit Ada like a physical blow. The sister Ugoma had grown up with, the one who had played with her as a child, who had braided her hair and shared secrets and dreams, that sister was gone. In her place was someone capable of murder, someone who had chosen jealousy over love. "I should tell them," Ugoma continued. "I should tell our parents, the elders, everyone what you did. You tried to kill me, Ada. You stood there and watched me drown." "I know," Ada whispered. "I know, and I'll understand if you do. I deserve whatever happens to me." But Ugoma shook her head slowly. "What would be the point? You're already destroyed by what you did. Our parents have already suffered enough. Telling them the truth would just bring more pain to everyone." Ada looked up, hardly daring to hope. "You're going to forgive me?" "I'm going to try," Ugoma said. "Not because you deserve it, but because carrying hatred in my heart would make me like you were. It would poison me the way jealousy poisoned you." The forgiveness was like a knife and a balm at the same time.
Ada was grateful beyond words, but she also understood that this gift came with a weight she would carry forever. But things can't go back to the way they were, Ugoma continued. I can forgive you, but I can't forget the way I used to. And I can't pretend that what you did was just a moment of madness. You planned it, Ada. You thought about it for weeks. Ada nodded, understanding. The relationship between them was broken, perhaps irreparably. They could coexist. They might even find a way to love each other again someday. But the easy, trusting bond they had shared as children was gone forever. As the days passed, it became clear that while Ugoma might choose to keep Ada secret, the community was not going to let the matter rest easily. Too many people had.
Most tellingly, she developed an obsessive need to apologize for everything. She apologized for speaking too loudly, for eating too much at meals, for taking up space, for breathing too heavily. It was as if she was trying to apologize for existing at all. "What's wrong with that child?" Papa Chike asked his wife privately. "She's acting like she's afraid of her own shadow." "Maybe she's still shaken by nearly losing Ugoma," Mom and Kem replied, but her voice carried doubt. A mother knows when something is wrong with her child, and everything about Ada's behavior screamed of hidden pain. The breaking point came during the village's harvest celebration, exactly 1 year after the festival noticed Ada's strange behavior during Ugoma's absence. Too many inconsistencies in her story had been cataloged and remembered. Elder Okoro, the village's most respected leader, came to speak with both sisters together. He was a man who had lived long enough to see through lies and half-truths, and his eyes held a weight of knowledge that made both young women uncomfortable. "Ugoma," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "we are all grateful to the ancestors for bringing you home safely, but there are questions that need answers. Your disappearance was unusual, and your sister's behavior during your absence was concerning to many of us." Ugoma kept her expression carefully neutral. "I understand people were worried. I wish I could have gotten word to you sooner." "Yes," the elder agreed, "but that's not what I'm asking about. I'm asking about the day you disappeared. Your sister has told us several different versions of that day. We would like to hear your account." Ada's heart hammered in her chest as she waited for Ugoma to speak. This was it. This was the moment when everything would come crashing down. But Ugoma looked the elder in the eye and said, "I went for a walk alone to think about some personal matters. I was careless near the river and fell in. The current carried me far from home, and it took me many weeks to find my way back." Elder Okoro studied her face carefully. "You went alone? Your sister said she saw you leave with someone." "My sister was mistaken," Ugoma replied, "or perhaps she was thinking of a different day. The mind can play tricks when we're worried about someone we love." The elder's gaze shifted to Ada, who was trying desperately to look innocent and concerned rather than terrified. "No, sir. I was confused when Ugoma first went missing. I think I mixed up different conversations we'd had. I'm just grateful she's home safe." Elder Okoro nodded slowly, but his eyes remained skeptical. He had seen enough of life to know when a story didn't add up, but he also understood that sometimes the truth was too painful or too complicated for simple justice. "Very well," he said finally. "I'm glad this matter is resolved. But let me offer some wisdom to you both. Secrets have a way of poisoning the soul. Whatever burdens you carry, they will be lighter if shared with the right people at the right time." After he left, the sisters sat in heavy silence. Both understood that they had been given a warning and a gift. The elder suspected the truth, but was choosing to let them handle it within their family rather than demanding village justice. Life in the household resumed, but nothing was the same. Mom and Kem and Papa Chike were overjoyed to have Ugoma back, but they also began to notice the strange tension between their daughters.
Conversations were stilted, sisterly affection seemed forced, and Ada had developed a nervous habit of avoiding direct eye contact with anyone. More troubling still, Ugoma herself seemed changed. The easy laughter and natural warmth that had defined her were muted now. She was kind, helpful, and dutiful as always, but there was a guardedness about her that hadn't existed before her disappearance. "She's been through trauma," Mom and Kem explained to concerned neighbors. "Near drowning, being lost for so long, it would change anyone. She needs time to heal." But Ada knew the truth. Ugoma wasn't just healing from her physical ordeal. She was learning to live with the knowledge that her own sister had tried to murder her. She was carrying the weight of protecting Ada from the consequences of that act. And she was discovering that forgiveness and trust were two very different things. The village dynamics shifted too. While people were genuinely happy about Ugoma's return, they also began to treat Ada differently. Not with open suspicion, Ugoma's story had provided enough doubt to prevent that, but with a cooler distance. Invitations became less frequent, conversations grew shorter. The benefit of the doubt that every community member usually enjoyed slowly eroded. Ada found herself more isolated than ever, but now it wasn't because she was overshadowed by Ugoma's light. It was because something dark in her own character had been glimpsed by the community, and they instinctively pulled away from it. Over the following months, despite Ugoma's attempts to protect her sister, the truth began to seep out in small ways. Ada's guilt was too heavy to carry perfectly, and cracks in her facade appeared regularly. She would startle violently whenever anyone mentioned the river. She couldn't sleep through storms, waking the household with cries from nightmares about rushing water and drowning voices. She began to avoid Ugoma's direct gaze, as if looking into her sister's eyes was too painful to bear, where Ada's jealousy had first consumed her completely. The annual harvest celebration should have been a time of joy and gratitude. The crops had been good, the community was healthy, and they had survived another year together. But for Ada, the festival was a reminder of everything that had gone wrong, everything she had destroyed in her pursuit of recognition. This year, nobody asked Ugoma to perform. Whether it was sensitivity to what she had been through or awareness that she seemed different now, the elders focused their attention on other young people. Ada watched this with a mixture of relief and fresh guilt. Even now, even a year later, her actions were still stealing opportunities from her sister. But Ugoma surprised everyone. In the middle of the evening's festivities, she stood up and asked if she could share something with the community. "Of course, child," Elder Okoro said, gesturing for her to come forward. "We would be honored." Ugoma walked to the center of the gathering, and Ada felt her blood turn to ice. This was it. This was when Ugoma would finally tell the truth about what had happened at the river. But instead of revealing Ada's crime, Ugoma began to speak about forgiveness. "This past year has taught me many things," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the evening air. "I learned about survival, about the kindness of strangers, about the strength that comes from desperation. But most importantly, I learned about the power of forgiveness, not just receiving it, but giving it." Ada's hands were shaking so badly, she had to clasp them together to make it stop. "We all carry burdens," Ugoma continued. "We all make mistakes that seem too big to overcome. We all have moments when jealousy or anger or fear makes us do things that hurt the people we love most." She paused, and her eyes found Ada in the crowd. "But I've learned that holding on to anger and resentment only poisons our own hearts. When we refuse to forgive others or ourselves, we become prisoners of our worst moments." The crowd was listening intently, moved by the wisdom in this young woman who had endured so much. "I want to say tonight, in front of all of you, that I forgive anyone who has ever hurt me. And I hope that anyone carrying guilt or shame will find a way to forgive themselves and make amends for their actions." Ada broke. The tears came first, silent and overwhelming. Then the shaking intensified until her whole body was convulsing with sobs she couldn't control. People turned to look at her with concern and confusion, unsure why Ugama's message of forgiveness was causing such a dramatic reaction. But Ada couldn't stop. A year of suppressed guilt, terror, and self-hatred poured out of her in waves. She tried to speak, to explain, to confess, but the words were lost in her sobbing. Finally, she managed to gasp out, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. It was me, it was all my fault." The crowd fell silent as Ada's broken words began to form a coherent confession. Between sobs and gasps for air, the truth finally emerged. "I pushed her," she said, looking directly at Ugama through her tears. "I took her to the river, and I pushed her in. I wanted her to, because I was jealous, because I hated that everyone loved her more than me." The silence that followed was deafening. Parents pulled their children closer, as if proximity to such malice might be contagious. Elder faces showed shock, disappointment, and a deep sadness that their community harbored such darkness. "I've been living with it for a year," Ada continued, her voice getting stronger now that the truth was finally free. "Every day, every night, knowing what I did, knowing that I almost killed my own sister because I couldn't stand being second best." Papa Chike's face had gone ashen. Mama and Kem was staring at Ada as if she was looking at a stranger. The other villagers whispered among themselves, their voices creating a low buzz of shock and judgment. "She forgave me," Ada said, gesturing toward Ugoma. "She came home and remembered everything, and she forgave me. She protected me from you, from justice, from the punishment I deserved. And I've been too much of a coward to confess until now." Elder Okoro stood slowly, his aged frame suddenly seeming even more burdened. "Ada, daughter of Chike, do you understand what you are telling us? You are confessing to attempted murder of your own sister." "Yes, sir," Ada replied, her voice now steady with the relief of finally telling the truth. "That's exactly what I'm confessing to." What followed was unlike anything the village had experienced before. They had dealt with theft, adultery, disputes over land and livestock, but attempted murder within a family motivated by sibling jealousy was beyond their usual framework of justice. The elders retreated to deliberate while the rest of the community dispersed in shocked groups, everyone trying to process what they had just heard. Ada remained where she was, sitting in the dirt where she had collapsed, finally free of the secret that had been destroying her for a year. Ugoma came to sit beside her sister, not speaking, just present. It was an act of solidarity that didn't go unnoticed by the people watching from a distance. "Why did you protect me?" Ada asked quietly. "Because destroying you wouldn't have healed what you did to me," Ugoma replied. "And because you're still my sister, even after everything. I don't deserve your forgiveness." "No," Ugoma agreed, "you don't. But I deserve the peace that comes from letting go of hatred. I deserve to not carry your poison in my heart." When the elders returned, Elder Okoro's face was grave. "This is a matter of such seriousness that it affects not just your family, but our entire community. The bonds of trust that hold us together have been damaged by your actions, Ada." Ada nodded, accepting whatever judgment was coming. "However," the elder continued, "we must also consider that your victim has forgiven you, that you have confessed voluntarily, and that you have clearly suffered greatly for your crime. Most importantly, Ugoma is alive and has been restored to us." He paused, looking around at the faces of the gathered villagers. "Our decision is this. You will be banished from this village for a period of 3 years. You will use this time to reflect on your actions, to find ways to make amends, and to discover who you are when you're not defined by comparison to others. The sentence was harsh, but not as severe as it could have been. Banishment meant Ada would lose her home, her family's daily presence, and her place in the only community she had ever known. But she would keep her life, and she would have the possibility of eventual redemption. Furthermore, Elder Okoro added, when you return, if you choose to return, you will work for 2 years in service to this community without payment, to demonstrate that you have learned to value others above yourself. Ada accepted the sentence with dignity. It was more mercy than she had dared to hope for. Ada's last night in her family home was spent in quiet conversation with her parents and sister. The anger and disappointment were still there, but so was a deep sadness for the daughter and sister they were losing. I failed you somehow, Mom and Kem said through her tears. I failed to teach you that love isn't a competition. No, Mama, Ada replied firmly. You didn't fail me. I failed myself. I let jealousy grow in my heart until it consumed everything good about me. That's not your fault. Papa Chike struggled to find words. How do you say goodbye to a child who has committed such a terrible act? How do you maintain love for someone who tried to murder their sibling? I don't understand how you could have done this, he said finally. But you're still my daughter. Come back to us, better than you left. Ugoma walked with Ada to the village boundary the next morning. Their goodbye was private, away from the watching eyes of the community. I hope you find peace, Ugoma said. Real peace, not just the absence of competition. I hope I can become someone worthy of your forgiveness, Ada replied. You already are, Ugoma said, surprising her. You always were. That's what jealousy made you forget, that you had value all on your own. Ada's 3 years of banishment were the hardest and most transformative of her life. She traveled from village to village, working odd jobs, helping where she could, learning to exist without the constant comparison that had defined her identity for so long. In a village 2 days' walk from home, she worked for an elderly healer who taught her about medicinal plants and the art of caring for the sick. The woman, Mama Chioma, was patient and kind, but she also made it clear that she knew Ada was carrying a heavy burden. Whatever you did, child, she said one day as they gathered herbs, it's eating you from the inside. You can't heal others if you haven't healed yourself. Slowly, Ada began to tell her story. Mama Chioma listened without judgment, asking questions that helped Ada understand her own motivations and actions more clearly. Jealousy is like a sickness, the old healer explained. It makes you see enemies where there are none, competition where there could be cooperation. But like any sickness, it can be cured if you're willing to do the work. The work was painful. It involved acknowledging not just what she had done, but why she had been vulnerable to such destructive emotions in the first place. It meant examining her relationship with her parents, her understanding of self-worth, and her beliefs about love and recognition. Most difficultly, it meant learning to see Ugoma not as a rival who had stolen something from her, but as a separate person with her own struggles, fears, and humanity. By the end of her 2nd year of exile, Ada had begun to understand something crucial. The love and recognition she had been so desperate for couldn't be stolen or won through competition. It could only be earned through becoming someone worthy of love, someone who could love others without keeping score. She learned to find satisfaction in helping others without expecting praise or recognition. She discovered talents and interests she had never explored because she had been so focused on matching or surpassing Ugoma. She began to see her own unique value as a person separate from any comparison to her sister. Most importantly, she learned to forgive herself, not to excuse what she had done, but to accept that she was capable of both terrible wrongs and meaningful redemption. In her 3rd year, she encountered a situation that tested everything she had learned. She was working in a village where 2 sisters were locked in bitter rivalry, each trying to destroy their reputation and relationships.
I know what you're feeling, she told the older sister, who reminded her painfully of herself. I know how it burns to watch someone else succeed when you're struggling. But let me tell you what I learned. Destroying her won't heal what's broken in you. It will only break you more. She spent weeks working with both sisters, sharing her story, helping them see each other as allies rather than enemies. When they finally reconciled, Ada felt a peace she had never experienced before. This was what healing looked like. This was what redemption felt like. When Ada's 3 years of banishment ended, she almost didn't return home. She had built a life in exile, found people who valued her for who she had become rather than who she had been. The thought of facing her past, her family, and Ugoma again was terrifying. But she knew that true healing required facing what she had run from. She needed to return not as the broken, jealous woman who had left, but as someone who had learned to love without competing, to value others without diminishing herself. The village had changed in her absence, but not as much as she had changed. People watched her carefully as she returned, uncertain whether the woman coming back was the same one who had been banished. Ugoma was the first to greet her, and Ada was struck by how much more mature and confident her sister seemed. The near-death experience and its aftermath had forced Ugoma to grow in ways that went beyond her natural gifts. "Welcome home, sister," Ugoma said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. "Thank you," Ada replied, "for welcoming me back and for everything else." Their embrace was tentative but real, the first step toward rebuilding a relationship that had been destroyed by jealousy and reborn through forgiveness. Ada's 2 years of community service were exactly what she needed to fully reintegrate into village life. She worked alongside the healers, helping to care for the sick and injured. She taught children about the plants and herbs she had learned to identify during her exile. She quietly assisted families in need, asking for nothing in return. Most importantly, she made herself available to anyone struggling with jealousy, comparison, or family conflict. Her story became a cautionary tale that parents shared with their children, but also a story of hope for anyone who felt consumed by negative emotions. Ada killed the jealous person she used to be, people would say. She came back as someone completely different. And it was true. The woman who returned from exile bore little resemblance to the one who had pushed her sister into the river years before. She had learned to celebrate others' successes genuinely, to find satisfaction in her own contributions without needing to be the best or the most praised. The relationship between Ada and Ugoma that emerged from this ordeal was unlike the one they had shared as children. It couldn't be, given what had happened between them. But in some ways, it was deeper and more authentic than their childhood bond. They knew each other now in ways that went beyond surface familiarity. Ada understood the true cost of jealousy and the hard work of redemption. Ugoma understood the power of forgiveness and the strength required to love someone who has deeply hurt you. They talked openly about that day at the river, about the years of tension that had led up to it, about the different ways they had both been damaged and healed by the experience. "I used to be afraid that people only loved me for what I could do for them," Ugoma admitted during one of these conversations. "Your jealousy, as terrible as it was, helped me understand that I am valuable just for being me, not for being perfect or pleasing everyone." "And I learned that I was valuable too," Ada replied. "Not more valuable than you, not less valuable, just valuable in my own right. That was what I was looking for all along, but I was looking for it in the wrong place." Years later, when both sisters were married with children of their own, they would often share their story with other families struggling with sibling rivalry or comparison issues. The tale of Ada and Ugoma became legendary in their region, a powerful reminder of how destructive jealousy can be and how transformative forgiveness can be. But the most important part of their story wasn't the crime or even the forgiveness. It was the transformation. Ada didn't just receive mercy. She used it to become someone worthy of that mercy.
She turned her deepest shame into her greatest source of wisdom and service to others. Jealousy told me I was worthless unless I was better than everyone else, Ada would tell young people who came to her for guidance. But the truth is, I was worthless as long as I needed to be better than everyone else. My value came from learning to love others without keeping score, from finding ways to lift people up instead of tearing them down.
And Ugoma, whose natural gifts had always come easily, learned that the greatest gift she could offer wasn't her voice or her beauty or her charm. It was her capacity to forgive and her willingness to see the best in people even when they showed her their worst. The story of Ada and Ugoma changed their village in subtle but significant ways. Parents became more aware of the different ways they treated their children, more careful not to create the kind of comparison that had nearly destroyed one family. Siblings learned to celebrate each other's successes rather than seeing them as threats to their own worth. Most importantly, the community developed a deeper understanding of both justice and mercy. Ada's banishment showed that serious wrongdoing couldn't be ignored or excused, but her eventual restoration demonstrated that redemption was possible for anyone willing to do the hard work of change. Every person carries the capacity for great good and great evil, Elder Akora would say when teaching young people about Ada's story. The difference lies in which one we choose to feed. As Ada and Ugoma grew older, their story became more than just a cautionary tale. It became a testament to the possibility of healing, even from the deepest wounds. They proved that families could survive betrayal, that communities could extend both justice and mercy, and that individuals could transform themselves completely when they found the courage to face their deepest failures. Their children grew up knowing the full story of their mother's past, learning from an early age about the dangers of comparison and the power of forgiveness. These lessons spread through the next generation, creating a community culture that was more aware of jealousy's destructive potential and more committed to supporting each person's individual worth. But perhaps the most powerful lesson from their story was this: true recognition and love can't be stolen, won, or earned through competition. They can only be received and given freely, person to person, heart to heart, without keeping score or measuring worth against others. In the end, Ada discovered what she had been searching for all along: not to be better than Ugoma, but to be valued for who she was. And that value didn't come from being perfect or superior. It came from being genuine, from contributing meaningfully to others' lives, from loving without conditions or expectations. Ugoma, meanwhile, learned that her gifts were not burdens to hide or weapons that made others feel small. They were tools she could use to lift others up, to bring joy and beauty into the world, to make life richer for everyone around her. Together, they proved that jealousy might be one of the most destructive forces in human relationships, but it's not the strongest force. Love is stronger. Forgiveness is stronger. The choice to see others as allies rather than competitors is stronger. Their story reminds us that we all have the capacity for both great darkness and great light. The question isn't whether we'll ever feel jealous or competitive. It's what we'll do with those feelings when they arise. Will we let them consume us and poison our relationships? Or will we use them as signals that we need to work on loving ourselves and others more fully? Ada learned that jealousy is indeed a fire that burns not just others, but the one who carries it. In trying to steal another's light, she nearly destroyed herself, standing in darkness. But she also learned that true love and recognition come not from destroying others, but from discovering and embracing your own worth, and using that worth to make the world a little brighter for everyone around you. And that, perhaps, is the most important lesson of all. We are not in competition with each other for love, recognition, or worth. There is enough for everyone.
The light that shines from one person doesn't diminish the light that can shine from another. In fact, when we celebrate each other's gifts instead of envying them, when we support each other's growth instead of fearing it, we create more light in the world for everyone. The river may have nearly claimed Ugoma's life that day, but in the end, it couldn't wash away the love between two sisters, the mercy of a community, or the possibility of redemption for anyone willing to do the hard work of becoming better than they were before. That's a truth worth remembering, worth sharing, and worth living by.